All in SJC is really about messaging. It's about how we get information out and working with partners, again, like Family Resource and Referral, like Reinvent South Stockton Coalition is how it gets done. So today, part of the mission for all of us is really to inform our community through various outlets, including this webinar and soon in-person issues, how important, again, homelessness is and the need for housing is in our community. The number one issue that we find in San Joaquin County, and you can ask any politician, any leader, any business leader, it's homelessness. So part of today's discussion is really trying to understand where we stand in terms of the real cost of living, both at the state and the local level. And by way of background, I wanted to mention before we introduce our guest speaker, who is just a wealth of information, is that United Ways of California has approximately, I believe, Henry, 20 chapters of United Ways within the state. There is an actual office called United Ways of California. Henry is a member of that gallant team that works very closely with all, again, of the 20 nonprofits, United Way nonprofits here in the state. Across the country, we have close to 1,500 chapters of United Ways, again, within the United States. We're also nestled in 40 countries as well. We are the largest, again, nonprofit charity in the United States. And we're incredibly proud of what we've been able to do in partnership with all of the nonprofits here on this call around homelessness and housing to really make that an anthem for our organization. So with that in mind, with that background in mind, it really is my pleasure. And it's taken us almost a year to get here. But I'd like to introduce today Henry Gascon, who's the Director of Program and Policy Development at United Ways of California. Mr. Gascon conducts policy research and analysis, leads communication strategies, and assists with organizational operations for the entire state of United Way. He is the co-author of the Real Cost Measure in California, which introduces a new poverty measure, and that conveys the true cost of living in California's communities and promotes the Human Development Index, which discusses, and you'll hear today, well-being and health, education, and financial stability. We're honored to have Henry with us for the first All in SJC webinar. And again, thank you, Henry. Please help me in welcoming, again, Henry Gascon to the program. So Henry, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristen, for that wonderful and kind introduction. And it's my pleasure to be with all of you here virtually today. I would love to be here in person, in room, having coffee with you and getting to know each of you face to face. But we'll go ahead and adjust to this post-pandemic virtual environment that we've been all dealing with for the past couple of years. And just feel free to unmute yourselves if you have a question or if you want to go ahead and just share anything in the chat. And I'm actually going to ask a couple of you to unmute yourselves as we start this webinar. So as Kristen mentioned, I work with United Ways of California, and our primary goal is to help to support the great work of the 29 local United Ways throughout California. So it's a wonderful pleasure to be with all of you here today. So let me go ahead and just do a share screen. And if you would give me the kind patience of setting this up, there we go. And I could still see your wonderful faces, which is great. So the first thing I actually want to do is just do a little bit of an exercise with all of you. So imagine the neighborhood that you're living in, and imagine you're part of a family of 4 with 2 adults, 1 preschooler, and 1 school-age child. So a family of 4 and 2 kids. Put that context in your mind. How much would you spend monthly on housing? Feel free to either unmute yourselves and just share a number, or go ahead and put it in the chat. And I'm going to try to press the chat button. But if somebody can just read out the numbers for me as I'm putting the slides up, that would be great. So family of 4 in your neighborhood, 2 adults, 1 preschooler, 1 school-age child. How much do you spend monthly on housing in your neighborhood? Shout it out. And maybe Zalim or somebody else can just share the numbers with me as they're being posted on chat.
Yes.
Or Kristen? Yeah.
2,100.
Okay.
2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 2,300. $1,800 to $2,200. 3,000, 1,800 to 2,000 are some of 4,000 as well.
Okay. All over the place, right? Throughout San Joaquin County. And it's maybe more expensive to live in some parts of San Joaquin County versus another. What about childcare? Your family of 4 with a preschooler and school-aged child. On average, how much would you spend monthly on childcare? And some of you may already be part of this family of 4 with a preschooler and a school-aged child. What are the numbers look like for childcare?
2,000, 1,200, 850, 800 for full time, 14,000, 1,000, 1,600, 800.
Interesting. So in some cases, we could see this cost of childcare be as much as the cost of housing. What about food? We know food has been getting a little bit more expensive lately over the past few months. So family of 4, 2 adults, preschooler, school-aged child. Count up all those Costco trips. What does it count? What are you looking at monthly on food?
Yes, definitely, Henry. So we're getting in numbers: $800 monthly, $650, $1,200, $1,500, $1,000, $1,200. Just a range of numbers here, Henry, as well.
Okay, no worries. And thanks for acting as an auctioneer for us, Zalima. I really appreciate it. How much would you spend monthly on health? Healthcare, family of 4. What would you spend monthly? 2 adults, 1 preschooler, 1 school-aged child. And it doesn't matter if it's employer-based coverage, if you're paying healthcare on your own, just monthly. What does that look like for this family of 4 in San Joaquin County?
So we have the numbers coming in at $500, $950, $1,000, $600, $400, $800 monthly on healthcare, etc.
Great. And let's do transportation. Family of 4. It could be 2 cars for this family of 4. Some might rely on public transportation. Just aggregate all those costs for the month and give us an estimate in terms of what you would pay monthly on transportation, including maybe maintenance on your cars, gas, ballpark.
So we have some numbers coming in, Henry, are $1,300, $1,500, $1,000, $900, $600, $400, etc.
Really interesting. Yeah. And of course, the price of gas is increasing, has been increasing over for the past year throughout the state. And many families have to deal with car payments as well. And then lastly, everything else, what do you spend after housing, childcare, food, healthcare, transportation? What do you spend monthly after that? And what do those numbers look like?
So we have no money left. Some responses.
No money left, yeah.
Some essentials at $500, $300. Hello credit card.
Hello credit card, yep.
Got to pull those out. $250 to $500, depending. From one of our community members, and those were some of the responses so far, Henry.
Yeah, it could be student loan payments, it could be broadband, it could be electricity, some of those other things that we haven't talked about as part of these questions as well. Great, so that's very helpful. So I'm going to talk about the real cost measure, which is a more accurate measure of living here in California, in fact, throughout the country. And for those of you who are willing to unmute themselves, tell us what you know about the official poverty measure. How is the official poverty measure calculated in the United States? Feel free to unmute yourselves and share that out. Any volunteers? How is the official poverty measure calculated in the United States? Any guesses in chat? Okay. The official poverty measure in the United States was founded during the 1960s. And in fact, it was founded during Lyndon Johnson's administration. And he wanted to declare a war on poverty, given some of the struggles that he and others in administration were seeing among many populations, many families throughout the country. So if you're going to declare a war on poverty, you usually need some sort of an instrument to measure it by. So very famously, an official in his Social Security Administration named Molly Orshansky looked at the cost of food because that was one of the that was one of the biggest expenses many families had to deal with during the 1950s and 60s. So essentially, she created a poverty measure based on the cost of 3 baskets of food, and it's been adjusted for inflation ever since. We are still using that official poverty measure today. It's based on the cost of food. So it doesn't take into account the cost of housing, healthcare, childcare, transportation, and all those basic needs that we just talked about. Isn't that alarming? So it's huge. So the official poverty measure has been pretty much outdated almost from the moment that it was conceived and created back in the 1960s. So when people talk about poverty, to me, it almost doesn't mean anything anymore because it's such a generic old formula that doesn't really apply to today's society. Another deficiency with the official poverty measure is that it doesn't take into account geographical differences. So it treats poverty the same way as it does in Alabama as it does in California. And we know that the cost of living is very different in both of those two places. So we created a new self-sufficiency standard called the real cost measure, which incorporates the basic needs of life: housing, food, healthcare, childcare, transportation, and other basic needs to reflect a more accurate measure for what it costs to live in California. And in doing this, we focus on working households throughout California. So it's really the working households unit that we actually get some really good tax data from and that we're able to use to calculate the real cost measure. And this data is great. The first thing that we do to calculate the real cost measure is to calculate household budgets. So we know that there are 58 counties in California. So we calculate these household budgets all the way from 1 adult in a household, all the way up to 20 adults in a household. Sometimes there's a lot of households that double up in order to afford housing costs, for example. And in some cases, in very rare cases, the number of adults in a household could reach double digits. So we calculated about 1,600 household budgets for every county in California by looking at the cost of housing, food, healthcare, transportation, all these basic needs. So on top of those household budgets, we also want to look at the people who are struggling, who are the families below the real cost measure as well. So we use the American Community Survey, which is probably one of the most robust surveys that the United States ever publishes. It comes out every single year, and it gives us wonderful data, demographic data at the state level, regional level data, such as San Francisco Bay Area and Southern California, for example. We have data for all 58 counties throughout the state. And what's really great about the real cost measure is that we even go down to the neighborhood level. So we actually want to look at what are the differences among neighborhoods within a county, like San Joaquin, for example. We want to take a look in terms of what's going on within each of these counties. So Los Angeles County, just to point that out, an example, if it was its own state, LA County would be the 8th largest state in the union. Imagine that. That's how many people it has. And that has 69 what we call neighborhood clusters throughout in this county alone. So 69 different types of neighborhoods that we look at within LA County alone. So that makes a huge difference in terms of explaining what's going on with the cost of living. I'm not going to wonk out too much on the data sources in terms of how we calculate the real cost measure, but just to show you, we use all official government data to calculate the real cost of living throughout the states. And the focus of the real cost measure is what's the minimum standard a household needs to earn to make ends meet. So in doing so, we use fair market rent rates by HUD. That's often used to determine the value of Section 8 housing. But we know, for example, that the cost of housing in California could be 20, 30, 40% higher than farm market rent rates. So we use a bare minimum standard. For food, we use the low-cost food plan by HUD, We use the Consumer Expenditure Survey to look at healthcare and transportation costs. We do 10% for miscellaneous needs. And then we've gotten pretty good in terms of calculating taxes, not only federal, state, and local taxes, but since we're looking at the household level for this study, we also look at the impact of payroll taxes and childcare tax credits, which are really instrumental and have been really important for many families in their ability to make ends meet over the past couple of years. So let's take a look at that example that we talked about earlier. 2 adults, 1 preschooler, 1 school-age child. So this is what a family of 4 would have to earn in San Joaquin County to make ends meet. According to this calculation of 2 adults, 1 preschooler, 1 school-age child, we estimate that it would take this family of four, $73,000 in income to make ends meet. That's an astronomical amount for many households in terms of their ability to make ends meet. So let's take a look at what the average income looks like for a family of 4 below the real cost measure. So usually, on average, we would look at their income. It's about $37,000 in wages. Maybe they get $460 in Social Security income, about $161 in CalWORKS, which is California's version of the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, about $2,700 in retirement on average, and that really depends on the county level and what that income looks like, and about $2,100 through the Earned Income Tax Credit as well. So the total income. So for this family of 4, its average is about $42,000. So notice the huge gap in terms of what it takes to make ends meet. This family of 4 below the real cost measure would need an additional $43,000 in income to make ends meet. So the biggest question for us is, how do these families do it every single month? And the answer to that really varies from family to family. Some would try to negotiate with their landlord and say, hey, can I go ahead and just pay half of my rent this month and catch up with you next month? Some would actually skip out on childcare entirely. And many families would just skip out on food, healthcare, and other types of expenses in order to make sure that their rent payments and food requirements are taken care of. So it's really a case-by-case basis in terms of how families really do it in terms of their ability to make ends meet throughout California. So once again, taking a look at this example of 2 adults, 1 preschooler, 1 school-age child, let's see how the cost of living compares among 4 different counties in California. San Joaquin County at $73,000. If this family of 4 was in LA County, they would have to earn about $95,000 in income. In Orange County, which is my neighbor to the south, $101,000. But if they're in Contra Costa County, in one of the more affluent areas of California, this family of 4 would have to earn $120,000 in income to make ends meet. So this is something that the official poverty measure cannot reflect in terms of geographical differences, in terms of who's struggling. The real cost measure can do that. And this is huge. And we also take into account the family sizes across households. So let's take a look at San Joaquin County again, and let's take a look at 3 different types of households. On the first column is 2 adults. On the second column is 2 adults, 1 preschooler, and 1 school-age child, the example that we've been talking about all along. And in the last column, we have 2 adults, 1 school-age child, and 1 teenager. And look at how the cost of living really varies based upon household size, and often how many children are in the household, and what are the ages of those children in the household. So you can actually just see one of the big items that is really different among all 3 is the cost of childcare. So if this family of 2 adults, 1 preschooler, 1 school-age child, on average would pay about $15,000 in childcare. But notice how as kids grow older, as they become a school-age child and a teenager, they need less childcare, and the average childcare expenses comes out to about $6,400 a month. So the cost, so the children make a really big difference in terms of the cost of living as well. So we know many of the challenges with childcare as well, especially during the pandemic. Very famously, we did a webinar with a great partner called Measure of America, and one of their speakers was talking about how during the pandemic, our home became not only our shelter, it also became our school, our child care center, and more. So many families had no access to childcare during the peak of that pandemic. Many working households were juggling between working, taking care of their kids, and making sure they were being fed. And it's been a big challenge. And in fact, many families are still experiencing with that, even in a post-pandemic society, in terms of how we work together and function as a society has changed significantly. So instead of paying for childcare, even if you could, if you did have access to it, many families who are struggling rely on family and friends to take care of their children. And in some cases, unfortunately, older siblings to take care of younger siblings, depending on what that family structure looks like. So usually in California, we know that the official poverty measure pretty much throughout the entire state ranges anywhere between 12 and 14%. And that could go up a little higher in the Central Valley, of course. But we find up to 33% of families in California are falling below the real cost measure. That's a third of the state's household population are struggling to make ends meet. If that's not a public health emergency, I'm not sure what is. And when we quantify this data, it's 3.5 million households throughout the entire state. That's a lot of families who are struggling, even though California is now on the verge of becoming the fourth largest economy in the world if it was its own sovereign country. Another big factor about households that are below the real cost measure is that 97% of households have at least one working adult in them. And in San Joaquin County, it's 98%. So what this tells us is that these are not families who are looking to take advantage of the public benefit system that is available to them. In fact, we just showed you that if families were able to fully capitalize on all the public benefits that are available to them, including CalWORKS, EITC, and TANF, they would still face a significant gap to make ends meet. So it's clear that even if they had access to public health to public benefits, they still have a lot of barriers to make ends meet. In San Joaquin County, it's 32% of families that are falling below the real cost measure. That's almost in line with the state average. And when we quantify that, that's about 57,000 households throughout the county. So we've also been publishing the real cost measure study since about 2015, and we've gotten pretty good in terms of doing some longitudinal analysis. We would like to go back to the 1960s and 70s, but frankly, it would take us 20 years to calculate that data, and we just don't have that amount of time. So over the past 5 years, however, we've actually seen an improvement in terms of San Joaquin County, in terms of the number of families who are struggling to make ends meet. 41% of families in San Joaquin County were struggling to make ends meet back in 2014, and now it's about 32% back in 2019. So our data only goes through 2019, and we release it every couple of years. We've had some challenges, of course, with the census because many people were afraid to fill out the census, frankly, during 2020. So we're still, I think the 2021 census data was just released this past month. So that's going to be the focus of our next real cost measure study when we release it, hopefully next summer. And that's going to go through 2021 data. But this context is really pre-pandemic, but I don't think the differences are really statistically significant between one year and the next. So here's what the real cost measure looks like across neighborhoods and neighborhood clusters. So the U.S. Census Bureau uses what's called public use microdata areas. I just call them neighborhood clusters. And what they do is they calculate neighborhoods to get a sample size of at least 100,000 people to make it statistically significant. So if the neighborhood doesn't have at least 100,000 people, they'll often combine it with the neighborhood next door to reach that sample size. So here's what that looks like across the neighborhood level. There's 265 neighborhood clusters throughout California, easily the largest in the nation because we have the largest population. But you can actually just see the huge degree of struggle that we experience throughout the entire state. Only 11% of families are struggling in the community of San Ramon and Danville. That's one neighborhood cluster, according to the Census Bureau. That's in the heart of Contra Costa County. Compare that, however, to 80% of families falling below the real cost measure in the community of Southeast LA and East Vernon. Even though East Vernon is pretty much an industrial area, it still speaks to the fact that there's 100,000 people living there and many families are still struggling every single day. we actually have really good county level data as well. So for this presentation, I aggregated all the Central Valley counties, going all the way from San Joaquin County in the north, all the way down to Kern County in the south. And you can actually just see firsthand the degree of struggle that many families in the Central Valley are experiencing that is much higher than the state average. Families up to 44% in Kings County are struggling to make ends meet. That's almost half of the population there. And the Central Valley in general, it's about 37% of families who are struggling to make ends meet. And when we quantify that, that's almost 380,000 households. So here are the 4 neighborhood clusters that the Census Bureau has defined in San Joaquin County. And again, these are neighborhoods that have at least 100 sample size of at least 100,000 people. So it's the northern part of Stockton, the southern part of Stockton City. On the east is Lodi, Ripon, and Escalon, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And then on the south, it's Tracy, Manteca, and Lathrop. So you can actually just see, for example, just the huge, the 2 differences between South Stockton, where we see up to 50% of families in that community are struggling to make ends meet, versus 22% in Tracy, Manteca, and in Lathrop. So I'd love to know, just among you, just in terms of what's going on in these 2 different neighborhoods that's causing such a big disparity in terms of a family's ability to make ends meet. And feel free to go ahead and just and feel free to share whatever observations you might have on that in the chat box, and maybe we can discuss about some of the neighborhood disparities during our conversation later today.
And
so
just,
another big.
Hold on, Henry. Can it's okay. Just I see Zulema has her hand up.
Great.
Henry, thank you so much. I know that a lot of valuable information, and I just want to make sure as well to, of course, there are 2 questions that are being asked, and maybe, we can discuss them right now. I know it was in terms of the section when you were speaking about childcare. So Casey Rain mentioned the following: I'm struggling with the cost estimates for childcare because the budget estimate for cost are dependent on keeping childcare wages under living wages. Is there a true cost of childcare?
Yeah, so we look at the average cost of childcare based upon licensed childcare facilities by the state of California as well. So we have actually good data on that for all 58 counties throughout California, and I'll show you how to access that as well. But that we get that all from, I believe, the education department is provided by the states. And you bring up a good observation about who's working in these childcare centers, and more often than not, many of the childcare workers themselves are below the real cost measure in terms of struggling to make ends meet as well. We know the low wages and the challenges that many of them have every single day to make ends meet as well, and that's been completely disrupted during the course of the pandemic. So we can maybe talk a little bit more about that during the conversation afterwards.
Thank you, Henry. Appreciate that. And I know this one might be leading into future household as well discussions in regards to the actual data analysis piece. We did have a question from Mr. Anthony Robinson asking, how did we come up with what defines a working household? Because COVID has changed those dynamics, and what measurements are we missing from non-working households that could also assist our analysis?
That's a great question, Anthony. And we rely primarily on households that report that conduct their taxes, that basically file taxes, and we rely on that tax data to look at the household costs for housing, for childcare, for transportation, and other basic needs as well. So that it's pretty much based upon tax filing. We do exclude households that are led by persons with disabilities, primarily because they don't often work, right? They often rely on public benefits and other services to make ends meet. So that's another vulnerable population as well. But we also partner with UCLA and the Fielding School of Public Health, and they have a great study called the Elder Index, which looks at the vulnerability of senior-led households. And even then, we're even seeing that up to 33% of seniors throughout California are struggling to make ends meet. And during the pandemic, and of course, maybe even now, we've seen many of those seniors come back into the labor market in order to meet basic needs as well. And unfortunately, some of them are just competing against high school graduates, college graduates who are just entering the labor market. So they're competing against themselves, unfortunately, for the same jobs. And that makes it really difficult as well, especially for them. So I want to talk a little bit more about the racial disparities among households as well. So we find in California that up to 52% of Latino households are struggling to make ends meet. And when we quantify that, that's 1.7 million Latino households who are struggling. That's a significant portion of the population. So we look at the four major racial groups. We look at Black households, Asian American households, Latino households, and white households. And our data complements a lot of the social science research that's currently out there, where Black and Latino households struggle the most, not only throughout California, but also throughout the rest of the country as well. So this is the rate of struggle within each of these different ethnic groups, and this shouldn't be surprising to a lot of folks. But I want to change the narrative a little bit on this in terms of this is the disparities in terms of within each of these groups. Let's actually take a look at the actual numbers in terms of who's struggling. And we still find in San Joaquin County that up to 29,000 Latino households are struggling throughout the area. But look at the second highest group. It's white households. And we find that almost 14,000 white households are struggling in San Joaquin County, followed by 8,200 Asian American households and almost about 6,000 African American households. So it really speaks to the story in terms of we know the struggle among Latino and African American families. And one of the things I'm really paying attention to over time is how is the Black population in California really changing? And even though it only comprises about 8 to 10% of the state's population, depending on where you live, they still obviously deal with a lot of the disparities and the struggles compared to other ethnic groups. So we also take a look at the intersection between the real cost measure and educational attainment. And during the 1950s and 60s, if you had a union job, it was much easier for you to attain some sort of self-sufficiency through your work that you had, thanks to the labor protections that you had back in the middle of the 20th century. Now, however, it's 2022, and it's clear that we need more specialized skill sets to perform 21st century jobs. And that data reflects that finding, where 60% of families without a high school diploma are struggling to make ends meet. But even 16% of families who are led by a person with a bachelor's degree in San Joaquin County are struggling as well. So it speaks to the fact, like, what opportunities are becoming available in San Joaquin County for families as they graduate from college, junior college, and other types of technical trade schools, for example. What opportunities are existent for them? And this could be a really great conversation with employers throughout your area in terms of what can we do to help uplift the lives of many families who are trying to reach their educational dreams. So we also look at the intersection between citizenship status and the real cost measure, and I'll let the data speak to itself here. But one of the things that we've been learning over time is that the ability to speak English goes a long way in terms of your ability to make ends meet. So for many parents who speak a foreign language as their native tongue, for example, many of them rely on their children and teenagers as their official ambassador for their family. So those teenagers are often asked to look at what's available for after-school programs, what's available for sports programs, what's available for nutrition programs for our family that aren't immediately available to us. And sometimes those teenagers and those kids are often forced to grow up at a higher rate compared to other kids because they're taking on more family responsibilities, especially when those parents are not native English speakers. We also looked at the role of gender with the real cost measure, and we find that 50% of households led by women are falling below the real cost measure in San Joaquin County. That could be single mothers, and that could also be grandmothers who are taking care of children as well. And we estimate that it's about 14,000 households in San Joaquin County alone. And we take a look at a couple of different types of households in San Joaquin County between married households, female-led households, and informal-led households. Informal means these are households that are doubling up. They're unrelated by cohabitating as well. So we see a lot of that in these informal households in the San Francisco Bay Area, particularly among teachers, where they simply can't afford the cost of housing by themselves. So they'll often double up with other teachers or other types of professionals in terms of finding affordable housing. So up to 25% of those informal households are struggling in San Joaquin County. And you can actually see 29% of not married households are struggling. We don't have enough data for male-led households in San Joaquin County, but hopefully we'll get some more data over time in terms of single fathers and also grandfathers as well, who are leading families. Another large population that's struggling too is single mothers. Almost 60% of single moms in San Joaquin County are falling below the real cost measure. And when we quantify that, that's about 12,000 households. So look at just take a few moments to just reflect on the challenges that single mothers face every single day. They're not only the breadwinner for their households, but they're also the entire emotional support system for their households. And depending on the hours that many of these single moms work, they're not often there to make sure that they are able to take their kids to school in the morning, are able to make sure that their schoolwork is being done in the afternoon, let alone pick them up from school. And unfortunately, depending on their odd hours, they may not be there at night to tuck their kids in as they go to sleep. So often it becomes there's a support system that rests within these children to make sure all the household work is getting done in terms of chores, in terms of getting their homework done and everything else. And single mothers, because of the often odd hours that they work, generally are really heroes in my book in terms of how they do it every single day. Another vulnerable population are households with young children, particularly those between the ages of 0 and 5, which are the really critical cognitive development years. And the primary reason why the cost of living is so expensive for young households is the cost of childcare, right? So if they're using a licensed childcare facility, a lot of those resources are going for their overall health and for their childcare development. We find up to almost 60% of households with children between the ages of 0 and 5 are struggling. And that's what makes organizations like First Five so important in our society today, is to make sure that those kids during those critical development years are getting the resources that they need to succeed in life later on. And overall, we're finding about 22,000 of households between the ages of 0 and 5 are struggling in San Joaquin County. So the biggest barrier that we've learned in terms of families' ability to make ends meet in San Joaquin County are the cost of housing and the cost of childcare. And historically, we've looked at housing burden, which is the percentage of income that we should be spending of the percentage of income that we should be spending on housing. And for many years, we've been told that we shouldn't be spending more than 30% of our income in housing. But we're seeing increasingly up to 40 or 50% of many families' income are going to housing. And the further below you feel the real cost measure, up to 70 or 80% of a family's income can go to housing as well, depending on what your family consists of, what the income level is, where you live, et cetera. And overall, we're finding that 62,000 households in San Joaquin County are paying at least 30% of their income on housing. So here's what it looks like throughout the entire state in terms of housing burden. You can see those deep red areas, especially in the coastal communities, where so many families are spending up to 30% of their income on housing. And the two neighborhood clusters that show the biggest disparities are 22% in the Intermission Castro district of San Francisco County, compared to 61% of families who are paying up to 30% of their income on housing, once again, in the community of East Vernon. Let's take a look at what it looks like in the Central Valley. We find that up to 38% of families in Kern County are spending up to 30% of their income on housing, 37% in Fresno, and 35% in San Joaquin County. So even though we see lower income rates in the Central Valley, we're still seeing a lot of families who are struggling to find affordable housing, and that exists throughout the entire state, particularly here in the Central Valley. And we find overall that 36% of families in the Central Valley are quote unquote housing burdened, where they have to pay more than at least 30% of their income on housing. Here's what it looks like across the 4 neighborhood clusters in San Joaquin County. And once again, you see that South Stockton community experiencing a high housing burden. It's 44% in that neighborhood cluster, even compared to 31% in the community of Tracy, Manteca, and Lathrop as well. So these housing disparities are prevalent throughout the entire state. Now that we've taken a look at the expense side of the real cost measure, let's take a look at the income side just for a little bit. And we know that California is incredibly wealthy, but it still experiences huge disparities in terms of income. So the state median in terms of household earnings is about $91,000. But look at the state and look at the high concentrated income levels that we see, particularly in the Silicon Valley area. That's kind of changing right now with layoffs that we've seen over the past couple of weeks with Twitter and a whole bunch of other places, but it's still one of the more affluent, it's probably one of the more affluent areas in the United States. You can see the average household income there in Cupertino, Saratoga, Los Gatos is about $221,000 compared to about $47,000 in the community of Bakersfield. So huge disparities in terms of income. So look at how the median income really varies with the state average versus the Central Valley. Central Valley, it's about $69,000 in income, and you can actually just see the huge disparities even within the Central Valley. We see Madera, which is interesting, about $75,000 in income. San Joaquin County, $76,000. But look at other areas such as Kern, which is it's almost $61,000 in income. So these income disparities are prevalent throughout the entire state, and even within the regional data, like the Central Valley, for example. Here's what the income level data looks like across these 4 neighborhood clusters. And you can actually see the big disparities. And I'd love to hear your observations on this too, in terms of the community of Tracy, Manteca, and Lathrop. The median household income there is about almost $101,000 compared to the south portion of Stockton City, which is about $50,000. So you can actually just see about the $15,000 gap between San Joaquin County and the state median as well. About $92,000 compared to about $76,000 as well. So I see somebody else is in the waiting room. Let's go ahead and put them in there as well. But here's a big picture explanation in terms of what's been happening with the economy over the past 40, 50 years. Since 1984, California's gross domestic product, which is the value of all goods and services produced in the state, has increased by 155%. Compare that to median household earnings, which has only increased by 11% during that same time frame. And I think if we were to go back to the middle of the 1970s, I think this chart would look exactly the same. So what this tells us, among other things, is that the middle class hasn't gotten a raise in over 4 or 5 decades. But the price of goods and services, particularly the cost of housing, childcare, transportation, or the basic needs, continues to escalate. So that's a big picture in terms of what's been going on with our economy, is our income isn't keeping up with the cost of living overall. That's huge. And when we take a look at a more longitudinal data, if we go back to the end of World War II, and if we look at our national data, we can see how our productivity has been completely off the charts. But look at our hourly compensation has pretty much flattened out since the middle and late 1970s. So that's a big story in terms of what's going on in terms of why we're struggling so much to make ends meet, is huge income disparities among families as well. So I'm just going to stop here just for a second. I'm going to stop the share. I want to go ahead and just have a little bit of a conversation with you in terms of, what has struck you the most about the real cost measure, and what are some of the things that we can do to help uplift some communities. So feel free. I'm more than happy to answer any questions right now, and then I'll do an overview in terms of the different interactive tools and the website tools that we have for you to look at and interact with this data.
Thank you, Henry. Appreciate you. Wow. All I got to say is I thought I had seen all the data that could possibly help us tell, the bigger story, the bigger vision for San Joaquin County. You just gave us a whole different view on it. I definitely really do appreciate, you coming out as well, being part of, this initial study that's been happening for a couple of years now. I do want to make sure as well, too, that if there's any community members here on the call, community leaders, representatives from agencies, if you all have any questions for Henry at this point, please feel free to unmute yourself. I know there's a lot of you all, so if you want to put as well raise your hand, I can make sure as well that we provide you an opportunity. But I will read you a couple of responses. We have here organized labor, awesome data. Every inch of our lives requires US for us to negotiate our living, which forces far too many folks to make temporary trade-offs with future consequences. So kind of us as well thinking about, some of the information as we're sharing here today. I do see as well, I want to provide an opportunity for someone that has their hand up as well. I do see Kristen, you have.
Yeah, I'm going to actually call on some folks here, so get ready. I would like to hear from Casey Rain. I see Jason and Daryl from Reinvent South Stockton Coalition. A lot of information around South Stockton. And then Adam Cheshire from the Continuum of Care in the county. How do you see this data being used for your own personal purposes to advance, again, the causes in your communities? And I know we'll get more from our panelists, but I'd like to just call all of you out, Casey, Adam, Jason, Daryl, any comments for us in terms of how the data might be used. And certainly if there's any surprises, or is this is information that clearly resonates with you, you are fully aware of it. Again, the intention is how do we use this information to really, I think, drive some of the initiatives that you're all deeply involved with.
Yeah, I'll comment. Hi, I'm Jason Weiner with Reinvent South Stockton. And as I said in the chat, I think, that map was really, really stark, showing the difference between what the number of people who are able to make that real cost of living in South Stockton versus the rest of the county. So I think it's just a very clear illustration of the disparities in the county that are there for many reasons. And the need to focus policy on how do we support those families, how do we get through those barriers. I do think, there's lots of other indicators that have shown this sort of disparity there. What this one does, I think, is really point up the ways in which those systems play out for the residents. We can talk about income levels all day, but when you compare it to the cost of housing in that space, and everything else, it gets really stark. My question would be, this isn't the only attempt that's been out there to try and improve on poverty level measures and other things that are there. There's been a number of these kinds of indexes through the years. And I'm wondering if you can say what kind of traction this one has gotten, because I'm thinking about how we use the real cost of living data and whether it's something we're going to have to explain every time or justify why we're using it versus other things. Or is it something that has started to be accepted in certain fields?
Yeah. Thanks so much for that question. And the real cost measure has been produced since 2015, and it's been accepted among many foundations who are actually using it as part of their RFP requirements for grant proposals. They're being used for nonprofits in terms of actually putting in what's going on in their communities to these foundations in terms of justifying funding. And we've had many colleges and universities looking at it in terms of for the cost of living in terms of raising awareness. So I did a real cost measure talk in, I think it was Modesto a few years ago, and one of their county officials was in that gathering, and she decided that after looking at our data, she would give all of our employees who are struggling below the real cost measure a raise. So that's impact right there in terms of using it as in terms of guiding benefits and salary compensation as well, but also just to encourage folks to talk about what the cost of living really looks like beyond the official poverty measure. Let's talk about housing. Let's talk about childcare. Let's talk about transportation and all the barriers that are compromising our ability to make ends meet. what we're trying to do as a United Way system is to bring all these stakeholders together so we can solve these problems and address them so we can actually create solutions to them. So that's the primary goal of this study.
Thank you, Henry, for sharing that perspective as well. Definitely this information as well is available on the United Ways California website. We'll put that link shortly as well, in case any of you want to.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
let me just do a quick overview of that right now, because I think this could be really helpful for folks. So let me just do a share screen, and let me just show you all the different resources that are available as part of the real cost measure. The real cost measure isn't just a study that we want to rest on a bookshelf. It should be a real shared living experience that families go through every single day. So on our website, we have a really great interactive dashboard. We have a budgets calculator. We have interactive maps. We have one-page county profiles for the Central Valley and San Joaquin County, for example. We have legislative profiles. We can actually look it up by Senate district and by assembly district, so you can actually engage your electeds about this. And we have some advocacy recommendations as well. I just want to take a couple of minutes to look at these household budgets, just to show how you can actually really interact with the data. So as I mentioned before, our household budgets is the first thing that we calculate as part of the real cost measure analysis, in terms of looking at all 58 counties and looking at putting in the age numbers of everybody in their household. So let's say in San Joaquin County, I have a couple of adults in their mid-50s. I have a senior at the age of 80. There's a teenager in the house at the age of 15. There's an 8-year-old, and maybe there's a toddler at the age of 2. So with this family of 6, six would have to earn almost $101,000 in income to make ends meet in San Joaquin County. And when we quantify that monthly, it's about $8,400. So you can actually play with this data. There's literally 1,600 different combinations that you can actually choose from across all 58 counties in California. But you can actually use this as a baseline in terms of what the cost of living looks like, really contingent upon where you live in terms of what county you live in, and also in terms of the population, the age members of everybody in your household. So that's a great tool. You can easily use it on mobile as well. We have this really cool interactive dashboard with interactive maps. You can hover over any of the neighborhood clusters, and it will tell you exactly what the neighborhood cluster is, what the percentage of households is struggling in that particular neighborhood. And you can actually download these one-page county profiles, such as for San Joaquin County. And here you have your one-page cheat sheet. So if you ever want to talk with a fellow partner in terms of the cost of living here in San Joaquin County, here it is in one single page. 57,000 struggling in San Joaquin County. It's 32% of the county's population, and it will give you some really additional data in terms of education, ethnicity, and some of the other data as well. But one of my favorite ways of how to use the real cost measure is a financial literacy tool. And many of you, I'm sure, have kids. And if you have a teenager who opens the refrigerator door after football practice at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and they're really hungry, they empty everything out and pretty much raid the refrigerator. At 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening, everybody else comes home from work and from school and everything else. People open the fridge and say, "Where's dinner?" It's all emptied out. This could be a general intervention opportunity to educate your kid in terms of how much you spend on food per month and how much they should actually save for you in terms of your ability to make ends meet as well. So I think how this can actually be used is really transferable. It's on the family basis in terms of, let's talk about the cost of living. Let's talk about, if you're a kid now, this is how much you're probably going to have to earn in order to be self-sufficient. And we know the challenges with many college kids who are graduating from college that often have to come back home because they can't afford to live independently or with other friends. So this is a great opportunity to talk about the importance of education, the cost of living, what we see here throughout California now. And it could be a really great tool, not only just on a personal level, but also on a communal level as well. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Henry, for that insight and for sharing with us. We did include the link to the website. It's really resourceful, everyone. It will go all the way down to the specific neighborhood. So please check it out. If you have any questions, Henry's here as a resource. We'll provide you his contact information as well. And of course, United Way of San Joaquin County as well would be happy to support in that. I saw Valentino's hand up, so I wanted to provide a space as well for him. Maybe he changed his mind, but I did want to make sure that we did give you an opportunity if you had a question or comment, Valentino.
I think, Zulema, that for some reason my name is not there, but Valentino's name is there.
Okay, great. Carol. Well, Carol, nice to see you. Thank you so much. It's Carol then. I know that happens to us all the time too.
Yeah, I'm not Valentino. I know Valentino's on here, and I did have a couple of questions for Henry. So, it's nice to have this update of what percentage people are paying for housing in various areas. I think there's been a slight improvement. I just wanted to say, because it used to be that people were paying 50 to 55% of their income towards housing. And I just wanted to ask Henry, did you look at the affordable housing units that were built that are specifically designed to meet, families' incomes? And the baseline for them is that no family should be paying more than 30% of their income towards housing. So I wondered if any of that was measured, because we've made some strides, especially in South Stockton. And when you think about how many Section 8 projects there are, when it comes to the housing burden there, you could pay as little as zero rent and get a utility allowance check.
Right. So the real cost measure takes into account the minimum standard a household needs to earn for housing costs and for all the other budget items. So in terms of that minimum standard, we talked about the fair market rent rates by HUD. So that's the bare minimum, right? So we use the average of those costs, the bare minimum cost, to look at the cost of housing. But we know that the cost of housing certainly varies from neighborhood to neighborhood, and we won't be able to delve into each of these affordable housing units that are building up throughout California. We can only rely on the average minimum cost in terms of average cost of housing. So we know that there is some improvement. There's some interesting policies that are happening throughout the state in terms of let's stop dezoning and really look at in terms of what we can do for affordable housing. In Pasadena, where I live, for example, there was a rent control proposition that was proposed and passed just last week. So it really varies from community to community, but there's no doubt that we need more affordable housing stock. And it's incredibly difficult right now with inflation, where mortgage rates right now are at 7%. So we need to get a control of that challenge first, before we actually are able to make some meaningful change with housing. But we definitely need more affordable housing throughout the entire state.
And my second question is, any study on the earned income, because I've always think that that's been a very silly policy that we give folks a lump sum at the end of the year. Whereas if, the earned income was distributed on a monthly basis, and that would increase, as well as the childcare tax that you receive at the end of the year. And it would seem that we would be in better position if those things were let go on a monthly basis instead of stretching it out to the end of the year.
So I'm not sure in terms of how the payment issues, but I can certainly say that the earned income tax credit is one of the two most successful anti-poverty programs that we have here in the state, in addition to Social Security. I think without the intervention of those two strong programs, I think we would see a stronger degree of struggle as well. And California actually has a state version of the earned income tax credit that's available for families as well. And that's something that we should be promoting for low-income families when they file their taxes as well, to ask about what's the state version of the EITC? Am I eligible for those? And sometimes it's automatic, but sometimes it isn't as well. In the chat box, I'm going to actually put share what the EITC data looks like by state. So there is that information available. But the bottom line is, just to emphasize the point that I made before, even if a family below the real cost measure was able to maximize all the public benefits that are available to them, including EITC, many of them still face a significant gap to make ends meet. Okay.
But would the gap
so with that, I just want to pause.
Would the gap be less, Henry, or
the gap would be less if they didn't have the earned income tax credit as well.
And all I'm saying from a policy provision is,
right,
how can we go after that to be distributed on a monthly basis so that there's more? Because being a HUD certified housing counseling agency, we see where families go borrow against that money, knowing it's going to come in. So they're paying somebody else 38% interest on their come. It's going to come.
And that would have to be that's a decision that's made by politicians above my pay grade, unfortunately. But it would certainly help for many families to be able to get those funds on a month-to-month basis.
But I guess why you asked, about how would this data be useful? It would be useful if we could show that and say, look.
Absolutely.
And I think I have not seen that out there, but if I was to go talk to somebody about this, I would want to say, look, here's what would happen if you release those funds on a monthly basis. We're getting closer to filling the gap. Not there, but this is a big help.
Right.
Absolutely.
That would be a really great consideration as well. So I'm going to go ahead and transfer it over to Zulema so we can actually go ahead and start the panel conversation as well. So Zulema, it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Henry. I definitely appreciate Carol. Those are all important considerations as well for us to really, when we're talking about one of the most important parts, Carol, and I really do appreciate you bringing in terms of the discussion around housing, because it is one of the top priorities for not just San Joaquin County, but at the state and at the national level. It's one of the largest conversations that we're having currently, and it definitely does impact every single one of us in this room and outside of this room, people that couldn't be here with us today. So I definitely, would love to hear from all of you. Part of this discussion was, one, we have the data. We all love the data, but how do we dive deeper? How do we share as well information about programs, initiatives, and also policies that will actually move the needle forward? Because a lot of times we will need to tackle this in different ways. And we would definitely want to hear from you all directly. And so we actually have joining us today a panel of folks. I wish I could have all of you on a panel, to be honest. That's our next big 2023 advocacy summit in the works for us all to really come together and really talk about these issues. As we kickstart today's conversations, though, we did make sure to emphasize as well some of the highlights that we saw within the findings of the real cost measure, as well as priority areas in our communities. And some of those went all the way from housing to childcare, to education, empowering our youth, transportation, et cetera. Some of those top 5 needs, currently here. And so the folks here today on our community panel are folks that maybe you have worked with in the past, or maybe you are meeting them for the first time, but we definitely would love for you all to engage with one another. We encourage as well during this community panel for insights on the chat, if you want to raise your hand as well, but it being as well an opportunity for us to really, dig a little deeper. I know Kristen as well, was, as encouraging for us to really look into how can we use this when we're going outside and really talking about issues with community members, with representatives, when we're developing programs, shelters, housing, new schools, et cetera. And so we have here today Rebecca Ray, who is the Director of Community Relations and Development for the Family Resource and Referral Center. We also have joining us Annette Sanchez, who is the COO for Visionary Home Builders. And we as well have Anthony Robinson, who is Executive Director for the Echo Chamber. And last but not least, Maria Garcia, who is the program manager for the medical transportation services at El Concilio, and as well a very important, programming across the San Joaquin County for our folks as well. So I definitely am excited to help lead and support this panel. We do encourage additional questions from the audience, from you all, as we dive into some of this information. But I will get started with our first question. We had a lot of information, and each of our panelists each have a specific insight, whether it's their direct work through their organization or personal experience, or both. And so I would really love to hear directly first from Ms. Rebecca Ray, if you can share a little bit from your perspective, what struck you the most from the Real Cost Measure report this morning.
Thanks, Zulema. So yes, for me and for us and our families, it's wild to think that nearly 6 in 10 households with children living in our county, about 22,000, fall below the real cost measure. So that to me is an extraordinary number when I think about that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And can you share as well a little bit in regards to, because when we're thinking about the childcare numbers, I know Casey Rain as well shared a little bit of, what does that true cost look like for our households here in San Joaquin County, as well as what are some of the efforts that Family Resource and Referral Center is doing currently right now, and that we can help support moving forward.
Sure. So really, I saw that question in the chat from Casey too. And so in 2019, when we had our last data input, we really saw that 48% of our working families are paying about 17% of their total annual budget on childcare expenses. The recommendation is just 7% of that annual budget. So we know it is an extraordinary cost for families, and especially those of young children. It's really our partnerships between organizations and government agencies here that allow our families to access resources. And so just by sharing out, 211 is the easy 3-digit number to remember to call. If you're a family and you are in need, we want families to be able to access resources. So it could be not just childcare and childcare payment assistance, but really housing, any basic needs that families need. So again, for us, it's really pushing out what we're doing right now is letting everybody know that childcare is available. If folks didn't, or, if they applied before for childcare payment assistance and they didn't receive that help in the past, that they are most likely now, because there's some investments from the state and the county, they're most likely eligible to receive childcare payment assistance. So we want childcare not to be a barrier for our families anymore. We want them to go back to work, increase their wages, or go back to school, so that can help better, their well-being, their families' well-being. And we know that when children are in early childhood settings or in preschool, that's helping develop the well-being of that child. So we are just greatly pushing out that message. We hope people on the call can let folks know that childcare payment assistance is available for folks who are struggling, for those who are below the real cost measure poverty line. So that's what we're doing.
Thank you, Rebecca. And you definitely as well hit on some really great points around, as well, people don't know that, there's been updates around childcare and, some of those new programmings that are coming out through Family Resource and Referral Center. So for us, we definitely want to make sure that, one, we are paying attention. There also is a huge need moving forward to us really to push forward with some of the legislation that does need to go into effect and really, back this, because it really does make or break certain households. To be honest, I can share from experience that it definitely, I've seen it with friends. I've seen it personally that, you don't have grandma, you don't have auntie, you don't have a friend that can watch your little one. And, things in terms of employment, that's a whole different story. So we definitely want to make sure that, one, we do realize that this is an important issue. And also, you touched a point around housing, and really understanding that with the housing component, it's either, am I going to pay the rent or I'm going to pay for childcare. And so I would really, love to hear from, our next panelist, Annette Sanchez, if you can share a little bit more as well in terms of what struck you from this. I know you've seen numbers, data before all of this. Was there anything in particular that stood out to you from today's conversation? And as well, what is Visionary Home Builders doing? I know it was shared briefly in regards to some of the advocacy being done to really make sure that households are getting, the support and resource and funding to really make ends meet. But really love to hear from you a little bit more about your perspective from today's discussion.
Well, thank you, Zulema, and thank you for having me on this panel. And I appreciate all of the work and effort that Henry put into this presentation. It's so valuable. And a question was raised about how we can utilize this information. And just having it at our fingertips for grant writing submissions is valuable. There's a lot of information in there that I could use for submitting for grants to help with our tenants. But Visionary Home Builders is known for the low-income, affordable housing, multifamily unit properties. We manage over 29 properties throughout the Central Valley, not just within San Joaquin County. And when the services that Visionary provides are targeted toward our tenants so that they can retain their housing. And childcare or early childhood development is a large component of that. In all of our properties, we have a partnership with a early childhood education agency that provides that service on the premises so that it helps the families have access, easy access for their children in the preschool age. We also do a wraparound service for our tenants with social services to help them retain housing, because it's a multi-layer approach. It's not just providing housing for them, but also someone mentioned about financial literacy. We provide that for financial literacy for our tenants so that they can understand where their money is going in their household budgets, how they can possibly save this way or pay for this, understanding what their FICO score means when they need to get a loan or whatnot, and how that affects them. We do run, which we engage our tenants to be involved with their local officials, elected officials, state officials, so that they are comfortable to approach them and discuss about what is really affecting them at the grassroots levels. They live it, they know about it, and they can share what the barriers are. As discussed earlier or brought up by Carol, we've often thought about the child credit, income credit, that instead of waiting at the end of the year, if we know that they're going to receive that tax credit at the end of the year, why not divide it up per month versus waiting at the end of the year? That would alleviate a lot of financial burden for families to receive that income per month versus at the end of the year. So we've discussed that. But again, it is us bringing it to our legislators to write up legislation regarding that. But that's, where we try to help our tenants in all aspects of social services.
Thank you, Annette. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective around when we're thinking about the concept of housing. A lot of times it's, here you have, here's the keys to your house, and good luck. Or you're the first time, person, maybe a first generation that might be getting the first house, for rent or for ownership. And what does that look like? And really understanding that, what I really see with Visionary Home Builders, what you all are bringing is not just the home, but the whole concept of the schools, the parks, the wraparound services. And with that embedded of us really looking into that moving forward as a community around really developing, neighborhoods where these things are within a reasonable distance. And if they're not, how do we make that? And Visionary Home Builders is helping to model that, helping to really, work, across different organizations and really making sure that folks provide, the need that they're needed. I know with you all have helped me navigate as well some things personally out in the neighborhoods for my grandma. And so though that type of approach, I think for us, I see it with Visionary Home Builders. There's other organizations as well as, modeling that type of wraparound services for our community members, because ultimately that's how we should be supporting, for us as a human being. What do we really, in order for us to feel whole, what does that look like? Everyone's different, but in the essence of it, of course, we are all striving to be able to have a place, whatever that looks like, to call home, as well as being able to have that support and those mechanisms. So as we lead to into the next part, Annette, I really, see it, well, that connection between, our next panelist who is here with us today, that is part of the Echo Chamber project. His name is Anthony Robinson, and he actually has brought as well a lot of that vision as well, including financial literacy for our youth, as well as for the parents, and really understanding that at the deeper level, what it is that our organizations and community members as well need to be keeping in mind, So I'm going to introduce as well, Anthony. I would really love for you as well to share, similar to our other panelists, if there was something in particular that struck you about this morning's information that was shared, and as well, what is the Echo Chamber, doing currently right now, and what does that look like as well for us moving forward?
Thank you, Zelina, and Grand Rising. One of the things that struck me probably the most, I took like a few pages of notes, but the fact that our official poverty measure is outdated. So what that means is, even when we qualify for benefits, there's still barriers for a lot of our folks. And I don't think we take that too much into account. So as I put earlier in the chat, to force folks to make trade-offs at the most impoverished level, that a few months ago, that payoff is going to have them in another economic consequence. That right there is burdening. I mean, the PowerPoint hit so well to home. Myself, just being transparent to just who I am as an executive director, having the funds to kind of at least be able to afford to rent, to pay the rent, et cetera. The real cost of living realizes that we ourselves are facing displacement right now as we speak, because the property owner from the house we're renting has decided to take the house off the market. So unless something urgent or drastic happens, I myself will be homeless in 60 days, right? Covering community with all the work I have to do with the Echo Chamber, benefiting all the helpful that you can be. And we have a situation and a dynamic that we're living in where you can have your house just the rug just sweep from under you, where someone can just pull your house and they can just put it into, we're just taking it off the market, so that you don't really have too much legal recourse or too many things to kind of mitigate from those factors, but you still have to just go on, right? The real cost of living really hits home to a lot of us, even without those barriers. So some of the things that we're doing is continuing to stay within the margins of the fight, continuing to use our experience to advocate, continuing to, like I say, we stay in South Stockton. So the whole data about Stockton is right in the area we're facing, right? So really to bring the PowerPoint home and let folks know this is not a game. This is not folks just getting on some call, some Zoom, right? Because one's getting paid for it or one's, no, this is real life measures that folks are dealing with. I myself is dealing with, my family is dealing with 2 kids in a home, right? Medical, disabilities, right? They don't care about none of that, right? We need to get to a place where we see housing as a right, not as some privilege, not as some affordability. And we also need to get to a place where we ingrain the real cost of living. This stuff should be negotiated at grocery stores, at banks, right, in parks, in neighborhoods, right? Because until we get the understanding, like waiting for the system to kind of change and get the understanding, I think the system is perfectly situated to whatever it's on or whatever it's doing, right? They're just profiteering, but we're the ones really facing the margins. So what the echo chamber is doing mostly is building capacity on the ground level, right? Working with the homeless, working with the formerly incarcerated, working with, like I say, South Stockton, our neighbors, the folks that where we stay at, working with Stocktonians, building an economic capacity for the youth through the Stockton Self-Determination Project, a grant we got from Elevate Youth. Because like I say, if we don't break what they call the generational curse, right, of poverty, it's not the economic access or proximity, or it's not only that, but it's the insight, right? We're not teaching credit and raising credit in high school, which is probably should be taught in middle school, because we know the situation that we're dealing with. They're going to need that knowledge direly as they're getting out or they're transitioning from high school. So really just putting really reality to the wheel and really just testing the measures through our experience, through our insights, through the populations that we engage with, continuing to try to walk and be the example, right? Because like I say, a lot of folks look to the folks that they know close in proximity to movement as that next level of hope, right? If you can get yourself there, maybe we can get there, right? And if you're getting yourself there and you're coming back and making sure that we also get there and help carrying that load, then even the more the merrier, even the better. And we're also holding city officials or whoever their feet to the fire and account. But like I say, Stockton needs to move from a shelter first to a housing first paradigm, mind frame, mentality, and intentionality, like period. Because time in the sense of urgency is beyond. And these dynamics of in poverty, like I tell people all the time, poverty is violence because it creates such a weight that we must deal with. And that weight is not an easy challenge or an easy thing to deal with. It's a force. Just as akin to as somebody punched you in the face or somebody gut checked you. And for far too many of our folks, not just in South Stockton, but in Stockton, period, and across San Joaquin County, we're dealing with this force, going about our lives, trying to do the right thing, trying to build community. And like I say, your house can be snatched under you. So you'll be homeless in 60 days unless you can get some help. And because we work in this system, we already know that systems that take their time, right? There's not really a sense of urgency in systems. So I think really understanding the real cost measure, right? Individually, personally, as family, this should be the next thing talked about on the for breakfast table, on the dinner table, in the banks, in the growth. We should be bombarded with a real cost of living campaign, because the issue is there's taking and they're snatching our homes and our safety nets right from under us.
Gonna let that sink in, Anthony. And I do appreciate you sharing that, Anthony, because you do bring up a point around, and I see here with Henry, the poverty equals violence as well. A lot of times, we, in terms of seeing the dynamics that are happening, within our neighborhoods, a lot of times, sometimes if we don't get to know exactly what is happening, at the deeper level, or for organizations such as folks here on this call, or for us personally, really understanding at the deeper level, what can we do collectively? The whole point of this call with you all, we've already voluntold each of you, but we do want you to be a part of whatever that looks like in terms of, for you personally, that you stand up for, whether it's housing, food assistance, etc. We want you to be a part of these conversations, and we need to be loud. We need to activate our households. It starts at our house. It starts in our neighborhoods with our families, and then as well in our work. And we need to be committed to that, because it does make a big difference. And I want to give our last panelist as well an opportunity. She has a perspective around the medical transportation services, everyone. That point where you're thinking about, for me personally, thinking about grandma falling down, needing some support. Who can I call? She needs a doctor's appointment. All of those things that come with health. And I see Ms. Natasha Garcia on this call. She made a great point around that, of us really looking at that next point where you show up and you don't have health insurance, or you have insurance and they tell you in 6 months, we'll be able to tell you and run an MRI on you because your insurance doesn't cover it. And in the meantime, you can wait. And so I think those are the realities our communities are facing. We also see community members such as Maria, who's on this call from El Concilio, who's working on a program that really helps to, one, it won't solve everything, but it is a great starting point, and it is a great initiative being done for our community members currently right now. So Maria, if you can share as well what you're doing, a little bit around the work behind the program that is being conducted, and any insight you wish to leave our community members with before we end today's call.
Thank you, Salima. So my program is non-emergency transportation. It is a free service. It is door-to-door to end medical appointments, vision, dental, even to your health classes or to healthy food access. What I am most surprised about with the real cost measure is the fact that, well, not surprised, but surprised, is that we are decades behind in wages. I myself, I'm from the Bay Area. I'm from Cupertino. So I moved out here during COVID times for the reasons of the cost of living. And San Joaquin County provided a little better lifestyle for my family. So what I am seeing, though, running this program is that we only cover Stockton, but San Joaquin County has a lot of rural areas, agriculture areas that do not have public transportation. So, it's disheartening that we are not allowed to leave outside of Stockton because it's all over San Joaquin County. So unfortunately, the future is to be able to expand through San Joaquin County. And the other thing I was surprised about was the education. The numbers was very high for uneducated youth without diplomas. How do we motivate them? What kind of incentives can we give them so that way they are prepared for life? They don't fall into poverty. Anthony talked about generational curses, it is very common. And, so how do the real cost? I mean, I plan on showing this to my children who are, in college now so that they know like education is important. But El Concilio, we provide several services for free. I won't name them all for respect to the time, but you can always look on our website to see what we can do. I always like to say we do everything by housing, but we don't do everything, but the hopes is that we do.
Thank you, Maria, for sharing. And definitely we will be sending out all of our panelists on here. And if you all want to drop in your website as well as your email, that we can reach out to each of you. I wish we had more time, to be honest. I would love this in person, moving into 2023, and really us diving deeper into these conversations. I think we've just barely hit just a little bit of, not even the tip of the iceberg at this point. But a big thank you to our panelists for joining us here today and for your insights as well as for your leadership. Henry as well, appreciate for always being our champion and for as well keeping a United Way of San Joaquin County informed and as well accountable to moving our communities forward. Without further ado, I'd like to pass it back to our CEO, Kristen Birtwistle, who will be closing up us for today.
All right, Zulema, thank you. And Zulema, you're absolutely right. We didn't even touch the tip of the iceberg. I think today's conversation, first of all, I want to thank Henry Gascon from United Ways of California. You'll be getting a whole lot more information from us here again, post-event. And I want to thank all the panelists who actually have done just an exceptional job of really allowing us to understand locally what, in fact, are the solutions? What are the policies that need to drive? What is, again, you talk about, again, the generational curse data. We're so behind in terms of compensation for employees. The list can go on and on, everyone. But I want to say, number one, conversations create solutions. And this is a great start. I want to thank Zulema Flores Abid, our Director of Community Impact and Public Policy, for forging ahead and putting this together. And if you have any questions, please let us know. But we're going to follow up with an evaluation, more information. And believe me, the All in SJC, again, digital platform for you to subscribe to will be coming your way. But we hope this is the first of many conversations. Keep doing the amazing work that you're doing here in San Joaquin County, whether you're a business, an academician, whether you're a member of the COC, the Shelter Committee, whether you work for the city or the county. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here and hearing this incredibly informative information. We hope it helps. All right. Until next time, everyone, live united. Take care, everyone.